The moment you stop chasing, the moment you stop texting first, the moment you stop trying to fix everything, that's when she suddenly changes. Now she's calling. Now she's asking questions. Now she wants to talk. But where was that energy before? Today we're talking about what really happens when she finally notices you don't care anymore. And trust me, it changes everything. Comment, no more chasing. Number 1, she feels the energy shift. When you truly stop caring, you do not announce it. You simply redirect your attention back to yourself. And that shift is visible in ways you cannot fake, because your posture changes, your tone changes, your timing changes, and the anxious edge in your behavior disappears. And she senses it immediately, because before this moment you were predictable, you were available on demand, you were emotionally exposed without boundaries, you were adjusting your schedule, your standards, even your opinions, just to maintain connection. And now you are not doing that anymore. Now you wake up and your first thought is not whether she texted. Now you go through your day without checking your phone every 10 minutes. Now when she replies late, you do not feel your chest tighten. You continue your work, your workout, your focus. And that is the energy shift she feels, because attention is currency. And you were overspending it on someone who had not earned full access. And when you withdraw that access calmly, without anger, without speeches, without emotional outbursts, the dynamic transforms instantly, because she can no longer rely on your need, and need was the foundation of the imbalance. You were investing emotionally at a higher rate than she was, and humans rarely value what comes too easily. So the moment you stop over-giving reassurance, over-explaining your feelings, over-initiating every conversation, she begins to sense uncertainty, and uncertainty creates curiosity, and curiosity restores attention. And this is not manipulation. This is correction of imbalance, because you are no longer placing her at the center of your identity. You are reclaiming your center, and that is what creates the shift. You begin operating from internal stability rather than external validation, and she feels it in the pauses between messages, in the way you do not react to minor provocations, in the way you calmly accept changes without chasing clarification. And inside she begins asking herself questions she never asked when you were always available. She wonders why you are no longer as reactive. She wonders what occupies your focus now. She wonders whether she miscalculated your level of dependence, and that realization alters how she evaluates you, because when you remove desperation from your behavior, your presence becomes grounded, and grounded energy commands more respect than emotional urgency ever could. And this is where Stoic discipline becomes practical, because you are not suppressing emotion, you are mastering response. You feel disappointment, but you do not let it dictate behavior. You feel attraction, but you do not let it override standards. You feel desire, but you do not let it erode self-control. And this mastery is built through daily practice, not theory. You build it by controlling small impulses first, by resisting the urge to send that extra message when she has not replied, by resisting the urge to explain yourself when misunderstood, by resisting the urge to chase reassurance when silence appears. And each time you resist impulse, you strengthen internal authority, and internal authority radiates outward. And that is what she senses, because before you were reacting, now you are choosing. Before you were waiting, now you are acting on your own goals. Before you were hoping, now you are building. And that difference is dramatic, even if it looks subtle on the surface. And if you are honest with yourself, you remember how it felt when you were overinvested, how you checked timestamps, how you replayed conversations in your head, how you justified inconsistency because you feared losing connection. And that state drains your confidence, it shrinks your posture, it makes you second-guess your value. And when you decide that your worth is not measured by response speed or emotional validation, You regain mental space, and mental space increases clarity, and clarity allows you to see behaviors without emotional distortion, and you begin noticing patterns you ignored before. You begin recognizing when effort is not reciprocated. You begin identifying where you tolerated less than your standards, and instead of arguing about it, you adjust access. You reduce emotional investment proportionally. You stop offering commitment-level energy to casual-level behavior. And this is where many people struggle, because they confuse detachment with coldness. But detachment is not cold. It is controlled. It is deliberate. It is self-protective, and it allows you to engage without losing yourself. And when she feels that she no longer has automatic emotional leverage over you, she must interact with you on equal ground, and equal ground changes everything. Because now, if she wants deeper connection, she must invest too. And if she does not invest, you are not destabilized. You continue your path, and that is the power of the shift. You are no longer trying to secure someone who is unsure. You are building yourself into someone who does not chase uncertainty. And the practical application is simple but demanding. You structure your days around progress, not reaction. You define 3 priorities that move your life forward, and you execute them daily, regardless of her mood. You reduce unnecessary digital exposure that feeds comparison and insecurity. You track your habits weekly, so improvement becomes visible. You train your body because physical discipline reinforces mental discipline. You practice measured responses in conversations, so you speak less and observe more. And over time, this transforms your baseline state from anxious to composed, and that composure is magnetic. Not because it is mysterious, but because it is rare. Most people operate from impulse. Few operate from intention. And when you become intentional, when you respond instead of react, when you invest proportionally instead of excessively, when you detach from outcomes and commit to growth, she feels the difference immediately, and whether she steps closer or steps away becomes secondary to the deeper victory, because the real shift is not in her perception, it is in your identity. You stop being the man who waits to be chosen and become the man who chooses carefully. And that internal transition is the foundation of long-term transformation. And if you are ready to build that foundation step by step, the Stoic Relationship Blueprint ebook for men is designed exactly for this stage of your life, giving you timeless principles and practical solutions that reshape how you think, respond, and lead in every relationship you enter. It breaks down how to control your reactions, strengthen your standards, eliminate neediness at the root, and build unshakable self-command so you never return to emotional instability again. The audiobook version is now available, so you can absorb these life-changing lessons while walking, training, driving, or clearing your mind, turning ordinary moments into disciplined growth. It is linked in the comments, and once you have it, it is permanently yours, meaning you can revisit these principles whenever you need clarity, reinforcement, or strength. If you are serious about never repeating the same patterns again, this is not just a book, it is a blueprint you carry with you for life. Number 2. She starts seeking validation. The moment your validation is no longer automatic, the entire emotional equation changes because attention has been fueling the dynamic more than you realized, and you see clearly now that you were giving praise, reassurance, emotional availability, and priority access without first measuring reciprocity. And once you scale that back to a balanced level, she begins adjusting her behavior, not because she is evil, but because humans respond to scarcity. And you finally understand that constant affirmation without earned investment lowers perceived value. So you stop complimenting every small update, you stop reacting instantly to every story, you stop initiating every deep emotional conversation, and you replace excessive approval with calm observation. And that subtle shift creates psychological tension because now she must evaluate where she stands instead of assuming guaranteed emotional access. And this is where many people misunderstand what is happening. They think detachment is manipulation, but what is actually happening is correction of overextension. You are no longer overextending yourself to maintain attention. You are matching effort with effort and nothing more. And that balance feels unfamiliar to someone who grew used to your consistent pursuit. So she increases subtle bids for validation. She checks whether you still watch everything. She sends small feeler messages. She changes tone. She increases visibility. And internally, she is measuring your response level. And if you respond with the same over-eagerness as before, the dynamic resets instantly. But if you remain grounded and consistent, she begins investing emotionally because investment grows where uncertainty exists. And this is where you must exercise discipline because your old pattern tempts you to overreact the moment she increases attention. You want to celebrate the shift. You want to reward the smallest increase with full access again. But growth requires restraint, and restraint is built through daily internal control. You practice pausing before responding. You practice asking yourself whether this message requires immediate engagement or whether your schedule remains priority. You practice speaking less but speaking clearly, and in doing so you train yourself to operate from intention rather than impulse. And this changes how you see relationships entirely because you realize that your previous frustration came from giving without boundaries. You were providing exclusivity-level emotional energy without exclusivity-level commitment, and that imbalance drained your confidence slowly. You felt undervalued, but you kept compensating by trying harder, and now you reverse that pattern. You focus on becoming high value through discipline, through measurable progress in your physical health, through structured work goals, through skill acquisition, through social expansion, and you notice something critical. The less you revolve around one person's attention, the more attractive your presence becomes because your identity expands beyond the relationship context, and she senses that you are no longer orbiting her mood shifts. You are operating independently, and independence commands respect because it signals that your life does not collapse based on her level of engagement. And this realization forces introspection, not just for her but for you. Because you ask yourself difficult questions. Why was I seeking constant reassurance? Why did I feel anxious without her approval? What was I lacking internally that made external validation so powerful? And answering those questions transforms you permanently because you stop blaming circumstances and start strengthening foundations. You develop emotional endurance by tolerating uncertainty without reacting impulsively. You train yourself to handle delayed responses without constructing negative stories in your mind. You observe your thoughts instead of obeying them, and this is applied Stoicism in action. You separate what is in your control from what is not. You control your actions, your discipline, your standards, your communication clarity, and you release attachment to outcomes you cannot command. And the more you practice this, the less reactive you become. And that calm state becomes your baseline. And from that baseline, you evaluate behavior objectively. If effort increases consistently, you respond proportionally. If effort remains inconsistent, you adjust access accordingly without drama, without speeches, without emotional volatility. And this quiet recalibration changes how others treat you because people respond to clear boundaries more than emotional pleading. And you begin to notice that validation becomes something you give selectively rather than compulsively. You compliment when it aligns with genuine appreciation, not when it is used to secure attention. You express interest without overexposure. You remain warm but not dependent. And this balance builds long-term respect, because respect grows from controlled investment, not uncontrolled pursuit. And if she escalates attempts to regain validation through attention spikes, emotional fluctuations, or indirect tests, you maintain composure because you understand the deeper principle. Attention follows value, and value follows discipline, and you focus relentlessly on increasing your internal value daily. You wake up with structured intention. You define 3 priorities before checking messages. You complete meaningful tasks before engaging socially. You reduce reactive behavior by limiting distractions that amplify insecurity. You replace overthinking with action steps, and through this repetition, you rewire your baseline identity from approval seeker to self-directed individual, and the transformation is visible not because you announce it, but because your behavior stabilizes. You do not chase reassurance. You do not argue to secure position. You do not overextend for uncertain interest. And that consistency forces anyone interacting with you to meet you at a higher standard or disengage, and either outcome benefits you because you no longer tolerate ambiguity that undermines your self-respect. And in this process, you reclaim emotional leverage not by force, but by indifference to outcomes. And indifference rooted in purpose is powerful because it cannot be manipulated easily, and this is the deeper lesson. Validation is valuable only when it is scarce and sincere, and you become the gatekeeper of your attention rather than the distributor of it. And through disciplined repetition, you transform from someone who seeks approval to someone who evaluates alignment, and that shift reshapes not only romantic dynamics, but your entire life trajectory. Number 3. She questions her value. Your emotional withdrawal forces a recalibration inside her because certainty has been replaced with ambiguity, and human psychology reacts strongly to uncertainty. And what you are witnessing is not cruelty or manipulation, but the natural response that occurs whenever guaranteed validation disappears. And this is where your growth becomes critical, because the temptation is to interpret her renewed curiosity as proof that you must now overinvest again. But discipline requires you to remain steady, because the deeper transformation is not about triggering insecurity in someone else, but about correcting the imbalance that existed within you. And if you are honest, you remember how you once questioned your own value every time her energy shifted, how you wondered whether you were attractive enough, interesting enough, successful enough, how you replayed small interactions in your mind searching for mistakes, and that internal instability made you overcompensate. You tried harder, gave more, lowered standards, and each time you did that, you slowly trained yourself to equate effort with worth, and now the reversal happens. Now she experiences a fraction of that uncertainty because the predictability of your devotion no longer exists, and the moment predictability disappears, evaluation begins. She evaluates her position in your life. She evaluates the consistency of her own effort. She evaluates whether she underestimated your independence, and this is not something you force. It happens naturally when you stop overextending, and the powerful lesson here is not about making someone doubt themselves, but about recognizing that value is always reassessed when access is reduced. And if you maintain internal composure instead of reacting emotionally, you witness something important. Respect begins to replace complacency, and respect cannot coexist with desperation, which is why your previous overinvestment weakened the dynamic. And this realization must trigger introspection in you as well, because you ask yourself why you tolerated inconsistency in the first place, why you accepted mixed signals, why you felt anxious at the possibility of losing someone who was unsure. And these questions are uncomfortable but necessary because they expose the internal gaps you must close. And Stoic practice becomes practical here because you begin separating perception from reality. You observe your thoughts without immediately believing them. You recognize that someone's shifting interest does not define your inherent worth. You refuse to internalize fluctuating attention as proof of deficiency. and instead you redirect focus to controllable domains: your health, your income, your habits, your network, your discipline, and through this consistent redirection, you strengthen identity beyond relationship context. And that identity shift is what sustains long-term transformation, because once you detach your value from external validation, you stop chasing emotional reassurance and you begin evaluating alignment objectively, and objectivity empowers you to respond proportionally rather than react emotionally. If effort increases consistently, you acknowledge it calmly. If effort remains inconsistent, you reduce investment without drama, and this calm, proportional response communicates more strength than any speech ever could. And here is where many fail. They interpret renewed interest as a sign that their previous overinvestment was correct all along. But in reality, the renewed interest emerged because you stopped overinvesting. So if you revert to old patterns, you erase progress instantly, and discipline requires consistency even when positive reinforcement appears. And this consistency builds internal confidence because you prove to yourself that you can maintain standards under emotional pressure. And maintaining standards is self-respect in action. And self-respect changes posture, tone, decision-making, and long-term trajectory. And you begin noticing that you are no longer consumed by the need to decode every message. You are no longer waiting for reassurance to feel stable. You are no longer prioritizing someone else's mood over your own mission, and that emotional stability forces anyone interacting with you to meet a higher bar. And if they cannot meet it, you do not collapse. You adjust and continue forward. And this is where life transforms, because the lesson extends beyond one relationship. You apply the same principle to friendships, to work environments, to social circles. You stop giving disproportionate energy to low reciprocity environments. You evaluate effort objectively and you allocate attention strategically. And through this practice, you build a life structured around intention rather than emotional reaction. And intention creates clarity, and clarity removes confusion. And confusion was what kept you trapped before, constantly trying to interpret signals instead of strengthening foundations. And now you operate differently. You strengthen foundations daily, regardless of external fluctuations. You build physical resilience through disciplined training. You build financial stability through consistent effort. You build mental resilience through reflection and journaling, and each domain reinforces the others. And the more grounded you become, the less susceptible you are to external validation cycles, and that grounded presence subtly influences how others perceive you, because composure signals strength, and strength commands reassessment, and reassessment leads to increased respect. And respect is the cornerstone of sustainable connection. And if that respect never materializes, you are still ahead because your identity is no longer fragile. And the controversial truth is this: many people only recognize value when access decreases, and understanding that reality does not make you bitter, it makes you strategic. You stop offering unlimited access to limited commitment. You stop rewarding inconsistency with loyalty. You stop negotiating your standards out of fear. And through this shift, you transform from someone seeking approval to someone offering opportunity. And opportunity is extended selectively, not automatically. And that distinction elevates every area of your life, because once you internalize that, your value does not fluctuate based on someone's momentary attention. You stop shrinking yourself to maintain connection. You expand into your full potential, and whether she questions her value or not becomes secondary to the deeper victory, which is that you no longer question yours. Number 4. She tries to regain control. As your behavior stabilizes and your emotional reactions become measured, an adjustment often appears because familiarity has been disrupted, and human beings instinctively attempt to restore patterns that once benefited them. And you notice subtle increases in warmth, more frequent messages, unexpected curiosity about your plans, light jealousy framed as humor, renewed effort in presentation. And the key is not to interpret these actions as victory or proof that you must now accelerate your investment, but to observe them calmly, because control in relationships is rarely loud and obvious. It is embedded in who reacts more and who maintains composure. And previously you reacted first, you over-explained first, you apologized first, you chased reassurance first, and that placed you in a reactive position. But now you pause before responding. You choose your timing deliberately. You allow conversations to breathe, and that composure shifts leverage naturally without confrontation. And this is where self-mastery becomes the foundation of long-term power. Because if you allow renewed attention to pull you back into emotional urgency, you erase the growth you work to build, and you must understand that regained attention is a test of your discipline, not a reward for your insecurity. And discipline here means you continue prioritizing your schedule over sudden invitations. You continue executing your fitness routine even if she calls unexpectedly. You continue progressing in your work even if she becomes more affectionate. And through that consistency, you prove to yourself that your center is not easily moved, and that proof builds internal authority stronger than any external validation ever could. And if you reflect honestly, you remember how easily your mood used to fluctuate based on her tone, how one short reply could disturb your entire day, how one cancelled plan could trigger overthinking for hours. And that volatility was the real weakness, because it meant your emotional stability was outsourced, and now you reclaim it by governing your responses. You breathe before replying. You choose clarity over emotional reaction. You state boundaries without aggression. You accept outcomes without drama. And this quiet steadiness unsettles anyone accustomed to controlling the tempo through inconsistency. And again, this is not about domination. It is about equilibrium, because equal footing requires emotional independence, and independence requires self-discipline. And self-discipline is built through repeated small acts of restraint. You resist checking your phone constantly. You resist overanalyzing messages. You resist adjusting your entire day for someone who has not demonstrated equal commitment. And over time, these small acts compound into unshakable composure. And composure communicates standards without speeches, and standards filter out low reciprocity automatically. And here is the uncomfortable truth you must confront. If someone only increases effort when they sense you pulling away, that effort may be reactive rather than genuine. And your responsibility is not to punish, but to evaluate consistency over time. You watch patterns, not promises. You measure actions, not words, and this observational discipline prevents you from being swept up by temporary spikes of affection, and it protects your long-term stability. And in this process, you transform from someone seeking emotional control over another person to someone exercising control over self. And that internal control is the real prize, because it impacts every domain of life. It strengthens negotiation in business. It improves leadership in teams. It deepens friendships built on respect rather than need. And it sharpens your decision-making because you are no longer reacting from fear of loss. And fear of loss is what once drove you to overcompensate, and now you confront that fear directly. You ask yourself what exactly you fear losing. Is it companionship? Is it validation? Is it ego reinforcement? And by identifying it, you remove its unconscious grip. And once you remove unconscious grip, you operate intentionally. And intentional living is the highest form of strength because it aligns behavior with long-term goals rather than short-term emotion. And you start seeing that every moment of regained attention is an opportunity to test your growth. You maintain warmth without overexposure. You maintain interest without dependency. You maintain openness without surrendering standards. And this balance is rare because many people oscillate between overinvestment and withdrawal, but you choose consistency, and consistency builds credibility, and credibility builds respect, and respect sustains attraction far longer than emotional volatility ever could. And if she attempts to provoke a reaction to gauge your attachment level, you do not respond defensively. You respond proportionally. You neither escalate nor retreat dramatically. And this calm proportionality communicates that you value yourself enough not to chase or cling, and that self-value reshapes how others engage with you. And even if the relationship does not stabilize, you are not destabilized. And that is the deeper transformation, because you have shifted from outcome dependence to principle-driven behavior, and principle-driven behavior anchors identity, and anchored identity cannot be easily manipulated by fluctuating attention, and through daily practice you reinforce this anchor. You journal your reactions and analyze where emotion attempts to override logic. You correct those impulses the next day. You track your commitments and ensure they are fulfilled regardless of relationship developments. And through repetition, you build a version of yourself who operates from internal command rather than external triggers. And that version of you changes every interaction moving forward, because control no longer means controlling someone else's feelings. It means mastering your own responses consistently, and that mastery is what ultimately transforms your life. Number 5. She realizes your value. Recognition happens quietly, and it happens after consistency, not after one emotional speech, not after one day of distance, not after one strategic pause, but after repeated exposure to your steadiness. And what she begins to see is not that you are indifferent, but that you are grounded. Not that you are cold, but that you are self-directed. And that distinction changes perception completely, because earlier she interacted with someone who was emotionally available on demand, someone who rearranged priorities to maintain connection, someone whose mood could be influenced by a delayed reply. And now she interacts with someone whose schedule remains intact, whose tone remains composed, whose attention is given deliberately, and this steady presence signals value far louder than pursuit ever could. And the controversial truth you must accept is that many people only fully recognize value when access is no longer unlimited. And that is not cruelty. That is human psychology responding to scarcity and consistency. And your job is not to exploit that fact, but to internalize the deeper lesson. Your worth increases when your standards increase, and standards are enforced through behavior, not declarations. And if you maintain discipline long enough, she begins to reevaluate the entire narrative she once held about you. She sees that you are not desperate, not reactive, not competing for validation, and that realization shifts how she speaks to you, how she plans around you, how she considers your time. And this shift does not occur because you demanded respect. It occurs because you embodied it daily, and embodiment requires action. You wake up with intention. You track your physical training and push for measurable improvement. You invest in learning skills that increase your competence and earning potential. You expand your social world, so your identity is not confined to one person's approval. You manage your finances responsibly. You protect your sleep, you control your consumption of distractions, and through this structured living, you build internal strength that radiates outward, and she recognizes that you are no longer negotiating your self-respect for temporary affection, and that realization triggers deeper reassessment, because now she sees the gap between what you offer and what she may have taken for granted. And if she steps forward with consistent effort, you evaluate it objectively rather than emotionally. You observe whether behavior aligns with words over time. You refuse to reward inconsistency with exclusivity, and you remember that transformation is about identity, not outcome. And this identity shift is the most powerful part of the entire process. because you are no longer measuring your value by who chooses you. You are measuring your value by who you are becoming daily. And that shift liberates you from emotional dependency cycles. You stop chasing reassurance. You stop over-explaining boundaries. You stop shrinking yourself to avoid discomfort, and instead, you communicate clearly and calmly. You express standards without apology. You accept rejection without collapse, and this composure elevates every area of your life, not just relationships, because the discipline you practice here applies everywhere. In negotiations, you remain steady under pressure. In friendships, you give proportionally and expect reciprocity. In work environments, you maintain focus regardless of external recognition. And through this repetition, you develop an unshakable baseline that cannot be easily destabilized. And the irony is that the less you seek validation, the more naturally it arrives, because confidence rooted in self-command is magnetic. And if she ultimately chooses not to align with your standards, you do not interpret that as failure. You interpret it as filtering, because clarity about incompatibility saves time and emotional energy, and time and energy are your most valuable resources. And protecting them is an act of self-respect. And this is where the deepest transformation occurs. You realize that the goal was never to make someone notice your absence. The goal was to become someone whose presence is valuable, regardless of who notices. And that realization restructures your priorities permanently. You build your life so full of purpose that relationships enhance it rather than define it. You cultivate resilience by voluntarily doing difficult things daily. You strengthen emotional control by reflecting on triggers instead of reacting to them. You detach from outcomes by focusing on process. And through that disciplined process, you become the type of person who commands respect naturally, and respect is sustainable because it is built on consistency, not emotional volatility. And as this new version of you solidifies, she sees what changed. She sees that your energy is no longer seeking approval, but expressing self-assurance. She sees that your time is not freely distributed, but consciously allocated. And whether she fully understands the transformation or not, she responds to it because stable strength is rare, and rare qualities are valued. And if she re-engages from a place of genuine consistency, you engage thoughtfully. If she does not, you continue forward undisturbed. And that independence is the ultimate indicator that you have transcended the old pattern. And at that point, the situation that once caused confusion becomes the catalyst that redefined your identity. And you look back, realizing that the pain you experienced was the pressure that forced you to grow. And growth built discipline, and discipline built value, and value built respect, and respect built freedom. And freedom is the true reward, because you are no longer controlled by fluctuating attention. You are guided by principles you practice daily, and that is how your life transforms completely. Most people stay trapped in cycles of chasing, overgiving, and quiet resentment because no one teaches them discipline, standards, and emotional control. And society would rather keep you distracted than self-directed. But you do not have to repeat that pattern again. The Stoic Relationship Blueprint ebook for men is filled with timeless Stoic principles and precise practical frameworks that immediately sharpen your mindset, strengthen your boundaries, and rebuild your identity from the inside out so you never beg for validation again. It is now available in audiobook form, meaning you can reprogram your thinking while walking, training, driving, or sitting alone with your thoughts, turning every spare moment into transformation. And it is linked in the comments, waiting for you. If you are ready to take full control of your life, comment "Unshakable Mind," like this video, and subscribe so more people wake up before wasting years repeating the same mistakes.